What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. Time for the playoff eliminator heading into conference championship weekend, and the video is going to be a little bit different this week because we have no new eliminations. And no, Ohio State's not eliminated. What we're going to do this week is I'm going to go through the 8 teams that are still alive, and I'm going to give you the playoff path for all 8 of those teams, what they have to have happen for them to get into the college football playoff. It's pretty simple to me. I think there's going to be some people that disagree with me. I mean, I think you're wrong. Maybe you're right, maybe you're not, but I don't know if we're going to find out anyways, because I don't know if these scenarios are going to play out. But I'll talk about, go get into that and tell you exactly what I'm talking about. But let's first look at all the teams that were eliminated. Again, all of these teams have been eliminated. We have 8 teams remaining. And again, I think the playoff path for each team is pretty clear based off what the committee has done so far this season. And I think there are 5 teams that, at first, let's go to the new eliminations. Again, there are none. So the 5 teams that control their destiny, that means if they win on Saturday, they will be in. Florida State, Georgia, Michigan, Oregon, and Washington. I feel 99% sure that if these teams win, they will get in. Obviously, Georgia, Michigan, Washington, there's no doubt about those. Again, I don't think there's any doubt about any of these teams. For Florida State, if they play bad against Louisville and the committee thinks that maybe this team's not as good without Jordan Travis, maybe there's a chance that they would not put them in, maybe put Texas ahead of them or something. I don't see that happening. You just cannot leave out you can't put a one-loss Power 5 champ in over an undefeated one-loss, or an undefeated Power 5 champ, I should say. So I think they're in. I think I'm, again, 99% sure they're in. And I think Oregon is in with a win over Washington. And I feel very confident about that. So the thing about Oregon that I have seen a lot of people say is that, well, if Alabama beats Georgia, they'll jump ahead of Texas and Oregon. They'll get in. First of all, they're not going to jump Texas. The committee has shown consistently all year that they think Texas should be ahead of Alabama because they beat them head-to-head. And yes, Alabama would have a great win on their resume, a win over Georgia. But Texas will also add a win to their resume, a win over Oklahoma State, a top 25 team. Not as good as Georgia, but still a pretty good win. And they've still got that head-to-head. So I do not see Alabama passing Texas, and I definitely don't see them passing Oregon. Oregon, 2 spots ahead of them. Committee has thought, all along that Oregon was clearly a better team based off of where they've had them ranked. And yes, Alabama would add that one over Georgia, but Oregon would add a win over Washington, a top 3 team, and also avenge their only loss of the season. So it would almost be like Washington was an undefeated team. Oregon, I should say, was an undefeated team. Alabama's not going to pass Oregon, and I don't think they're going to pass Texas either. So if Oregon wins, they will slide right into the college football playoff. In fact, they might wind up putting them at 3 and Florida State at 4 if Florida State looks a little bit sloppy again. I don't think Florida State's going to drop out of the top 4, but they might, just for seeding purposes, say, look, we think Oregon's better than Florida State. If Georgia's number 1, they should get to play Florida State, not Oregon. I could see them doing that, but again, it's clear. These teams, if you win, you're in. I'm not going to go through all the scenarios of what these teams would need to happen if they lose. I think Georgia and Michigan would still be in good shape. Oregon and Washington obviously will play each other, so the winner's in, the loser's out. I don't really see the loser of that game getting in unless we got just total chaos. And definitely not Oregon, but maybe Washington again if we got just a ton of chaos. I really don't know if there is a way that Washington gets in with a loss, but Florida State would be the one team that if they lose, I really just don't see them getting in. So let's get to the teams that need some help, and I'll go through the path that these teams, their playoff path, what they need to happen for them to get in. And we'll start with, so look at the 3 teams here again: Alabama, Ohio State, and Texas. And yes, Ohio State's still alive, and it's pretty simple how they get in, and we'll show you that. Let's start though with Alabama. So this is their path. They need to beat Georgia obviously first, and then they need a loss from either Florida State or Texas. They don't have to both lose, they just have to have one of those teams lose. If that happens, Michigan goes to number 1. Then you're going to see, let's say Washington wins, they go to number 2. And then Florida State or Texas, whoever doesn't lose, is at 3. Alabama's at 4. It's pretty simple. So that's what Alabama needs to get in. There is a thought, though, with Georgia. If they're at number 1 now and they lose a really close game, if the committee still thinks they're better than Alabama, is there a chance that Georgia stays in and Alabama does not get it? That doesn't seem right. I don't see how they could do that. But again, falling from 1 to 5, I don't know if that's really ever happened. We've never had this many undefeated and one-loss teams either, or at least undefeated teams. So I think that Alabama would be in. Again, if Texas or Florida State loses, I feel maybe not 99% sure, but 90% sure that they would be in this scenario. So if you're an Alabama fan, you're rooting for Louisville, you're rooting for Oklahoma State. You need one of those teams to win. If they do, and you beat Georgia, you're in. If you don't, I do not. If you don't get that, I don't think Alabama's in. I don't think, again, they're going to pass the Pac-12 champ. They're not going to pass Texas. They're not going to pass Florida State. Not going to pass Michigan. They would be left out if Florida State and Texas both wind up winning. But again, first of all, you got to beat Georgia. That's first and foremost, obviously. So let's go to Texas now. They need to beat Oklahoma State, obviously. And they need a Florida State loss. They're going to have a little bit of help. They're not going to jump ahead of Oregon. Even if Oregon wins, they're not going to jump ahead of Florida State. If Florida State's undefeated, I mean, there's really no other. It's pretty simple. They've got to have a loss from Florida State. I don't know that they would even jump ahead of Michigan if Michigan were to lose. If Alabama beats Georgia, then what happens? Maybe there's a way for them to get in that scenario, and I guess I could have listed that here, a Florida State or Georgia loss, because then, if Georgia loses, you could have Michigan slide up to number 2. You could have Washington or Oregon there at 2, Florida State at 3. And so, yeah, I guess Georgia losing also more than likely would get Texas in. Unless, again, they put Georgia at 4 and leave Texas at 5 and Alabama at 6. I don't know how that would play out. But the easiest path, and that's really what I was trying to do here, is look for the most likely path for these teams. The most likely path for Texas is just to have Louisville beat Florida State. When no Jordan Travis, that's absolutely possible. And so that's what you need to do if you're Texas. But again, first and foremost, got to beat Oklahoma State. And then Ohio State. So what's their path? This one's a little bit more complicated. They need Georgia and Washington to both win. So you get those teams in. And then Michigan also would be in. And then they need both Florida State and Texas to lose. So if you're Ohio State, you need Florida State and Texas both to lose. If you're Alabama, you need Florida State or Texas to lose. But in this scenario, Ohio State would get in. So if you think they're eliminated, I mean, you're wrong. They would get in here. And I say that without having seen the rankings this week. If they drop them all the way to number 8, then okay, maybe they don't really have a shot. But I don't think they're going to fall that far. I think they're probably going to fall to maybe number 5 this week. Again, we'll see when the rankings come out tonight. But assuming they don't drop like all the way to 8, this would be enough to get them in. So again, Georgia, Washington, and Michigan would be in. They're not going to put Florida State in if they lose. They don't have Jordan Travis. Oregon with another loss to Washington, they're not going to get in. Texas with 2 losses, Alabama with 2 losses, they're not going to get in. And Ohio State would be in. So this is what you need if you're a Buckeye fan. Again, Georgia, Washington to win. Florida State and Texas both lose. Could happen. I don't really see it happening, but that's not too crazy. I mean, that's a scenario that is realistic. So if you're an Ohio State fan, don't give up hope just yet, but this is what you need to have happen. And then even if Oregon beat Washington, would Washington potentially fall behind Ohio State? That would definitely be a debate there. But I think this way definitely gets the Buckeyes in. So this is the playoff picture now. Georgia at 1, assuming they win. Michigan, same thing there. Winner of Washington and Oregon at 3. And I do think that Oregon will be 3 and Florida State at 4 if it plays out that way, just because I think the committee is going to look at Oregon as a better team, and I think they want to reward Georgia by letting them play Florida State without Jordan Travis. Without that injury, I think Florida State would be at 3 and Oregon would be at 4. And then you've got the other teams that are alive. Again, Alabama talked about what they need to have happen. Ohio State just showed you that, and same thing for Texas. But those teams, Alabama, Texas, Ohio State, they all need some help. Will they get it? We'll find out this weekend. Again, I think it's pretty clear cut. If you guys have an argument, go ahead and give it to me, and maybe you can convince me otherwise. But I'm very much convinced that this is the way it's going to play out, or these are the scenarios based off of what the committee has done so far this season. So again, give me your thoughts down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.